Hey guys, Todd with 306 Foxbody. When I used to drag race the 86, probably the last time I did 8th mile drag racing at our local airport was about 7 years ago or so. And even in my hometown of Esterhazy, we had airport drag races. So the traction wasn't quite like a prep track by any means, but here in Yorkton, the traction would actually get pretty good. But I was always struggling with traction. I had some 70-30 Lakewood struts up front, 50-50 shocks. I had some drag race springs in the front. I had an airbag in the right rear spring to keep the car from twisting over. But when I raced, traction was always kind of a problem. I obviously ran the Mickey Thompson 26x10 slicks, which of course do wonders. But years ago I'd hear guys say, oh, when I race I always have a eighth of a tank of fuel to lighten the car up, and I believe that I should have a full tank of fuel, because the extra weight in the car, the extra traction, I'll make it up at the starting line. That extra tenth or two to get going. Okay, let's crunch some numbers here. Now, let's go into this horsepower calculator. Now, this isn't real world. It's just an idea to see what's going on here. And something, like, let's face it, if you're on a prep track, the traction's pretty good. If the suspension is set up correctly, you won't need as much weight over the rear wheels, because it's going to dig in the way it should. So let's check this out. So here's the, let's assume that a car with the driver is 3,500 pounds. And it makes 600 horsepower. Calculate. So we got a 1.674 60-foot time and 10.9 in the quarter. So let's add on 138 pounds. So 36, 38. Calculate. So that's so this is saying that your 60-foot time is going to get worse. But in reality, with the extra weight, if it gets better, see the difference between those two weights of the vehicle is about 0.14 in quarter mile ET and 0.02 in your 60-foot. So your 60-foot, there's hardly any difference. But it's saying that the car is technically a little bit slower because it's heavier. But one thing that we're not taking into consideration is, on the street or a non-prep track, I can actually spin into second gear for a little bit. So the extra weight over the rear wheels can help me out too. So with the 60-foot, because of the extra weight being 0.02 seconds, well, that's hardly anything at all. So if you could knock off 0.2 of a second in your 60-foot, that is definitely going to help you down the track. You'll more than make it up, because they say for every 100 pounds, the rule of thumb is about 1/10 of a second. And yeah, this works out to 0.14 seconds by adding 138 pounds. So yeah, that all adds up. So if I can knock off 0.2 of a second, if I could go from a 1.8 60-foot down to a 1.6, and the car's going to be safer. It's going to be safer. You'll have more control than sitting there spinning. When you're spinning, you're not winning. So anyways, that's my theory behind it. I do believe, though, a car with a highly tuned suspension may not need as much weight, but this is for the average guy. This is what I found. This is what worked for me. But if you have a car with a highly tuned rear suspension, the geometry is set up perfectly, it will have better traction than the average street car. And obviously, by going back to my original suspension setup that I had years ago with my older control arms and the anti-squat brackets. It proves that compared to now, the car doesn't hook up as good. So that's why I want to put the anti-squats back on and those straight control arms. Now, my suspension tips, they're for the average guy. It's not high-tech racing. As your car gets higher in horsepower, there's things that you're going to want to do, like it's likely very worthwhile to have your chassis squared off and checked out. So you take it to a shop, they make sure, for example, if you have adjustable upper control arms, you could actually get the rear end to move side to side so it sits nice and square within the wheel wells. If you got bigger wheels, you can avoid tire rubbing, plus to square the rear axle off to the rest of the car. And more importantly, to get your alignment, the whole car in alignment, because the faster you go, you don't want to have anything out of whack that will jeopardize your safety or the safety of others. Let's face it, we've seen videos where things happen because a part of it can be the alignment is out, but there's also lots of other factors. So at one time I had a straight control arm in the back with an adjustable spring perch. And I had anti-squat brackets on there. Now I've got the Maximum Motorsports, those curved control arms, no anti-squat brackets. The car will not hook like what it used to at all. And here's what I'm talking about. So if you have a straight control arm, if you look at the videos with chassis geometry, if you have your control arm is fairly level, then you extend the line from the control arm, and then you look at your upper control arms, extend that line and find out where they cross. So what that does, this control arm, the angle of it where it intersects with the line of the upper control arm, it's kind of like a lever effect to help plant the wheels into the ground. But now if you have the same control arm with an anti-squat bracket, that makes that angle greater. That line intersects closer to the back of the car, more in the center of the car. Anyways, because of this geometry, it'll actually plant the wheels back down into the ground. Like, that's the whole idea of the original Southside machine lift bar. And all too often I would see videos of where guys would say, oh, I saw this Mustang take off and it squatted right down and it dug right in. It had awesome traction. Well, guys, when your car squats, that's the suspension unloading and you're actually losing traction. So on my 86, what I'm going to do now, here's what I've got. I've got a Maximum Motorsports straight control arm. I got my original anti-squat brackets. So I'll be able to, what that's going to do is, that's going to make the angle of the control arm greater. It won't be so flat. And that's going to help plant the tires into the ground when I take off. So I'm putting these back on, and I might modify it to have a adjustable spring perch to adjust my ride height. So other things that a guy can do to increase your traction, I've got a tubular K-member. Well, any weight you could take off the front of the car and move to the back of the car, or just take off the front of the car, is a win-win when it comes to traction. So the factory K-member is quite heavy. It's sort of a big, heavy stamped steel, welded up piece of a few different parts. And I'm just going to guess, if it weighs 100 pounds, a tubular K-member might weigh 50. I'm just kind of throwing some numbers out there. And any weight off the front of the car helps with your weight transfer, obviously. I also removed the front coil springs and went to a drag race coilover. And with the drag race coilover, I'm actually not a big fan of coilover suspensions for a street car because they're usually pretty rough. But with a drag race coil, the car actually rides pretty nice. So that will knock off a bunch of weight off the front of the car. But I still had some traction problems. So what I did do, like most guys would do, I put my battery in the trunk. And or at some of the races I go through, tech, they go through the car and they take a look. They say, oh, you got your spare tire in there. And I actually would have it anchored down really well. But most guys take their spare tire out because, what does that weigh? Let's check it out. Okay, I'm not pushing down on it. It's about 28 pounds. So there's another 28 pounds over the rear wheels that you never had. So why anybody would take their spare out, that weight is right where you want it. So there's my ballast, really innocent looking. And I just had to laugh every time I went through tech or someone would look in the back of the car, they'd see a spare tire in there and they would just say, well, why do you even have that in there? Everything's for a reason, folks. So anyways, that knocked a couple tenths off my 60 foot. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. Cheers.